So, probably the worst human being I had the misfortune to cover during his two-faced years, who tried to basically make religion into his own prostitution, and prostitution brought him down. According to published reports today, on July 1st, televangelist Jimmy Swaggart, that disgraced piece of shit, whose ministry was toppled by prostitution scandals, has passed away at the age of 90. Now, according to a press release from Baton Rouge, televangelist Jimmy Swaggart, whose multi-million-dollar ministry and huge audience dwindled following his prostitution scandals, has passed away. He was 90. Swaggart's death was announced Tuesday on his public Facebook page. A cause wasn't immediately given, though Swaggart had been in ill health. The native of Louisiana was best known for being a captivating Pentecostal preacher with a massive following before being caught on camera with a prostitute in New Orleans in 1988. One of a string of successful TV preachers brought down in the 80s and 90s by sex scandals. He continued preaching for decades, but with a much reduced audience. Swaggart encapsulated his downfall in a tearful 1998 sermon, in which he wept and apologized but made no reference to his connection to a prostitute. With tears coming down his face, the two-faced said, "I have sinned against you," Swaggart told parishioners nationwide. "I beg you forgive me." He announced his resignation from the Assemblies of God later that year, shortly after the church said it was defrocking him for rejecting punishment. It had ordered for moral failure. The church had wanted him to undergo a 2-year rehabilitation program, including not preaching for a full year. Swaggart said at the time that he knew dismissal was inevitable, but insisted he had no choice but to separate from the church to save his ministry and Bible college. Now, Swaggart obviously grew up very poor. The son of a preacher in a multi-music-rich family, he excelled at piano and gospel music, playing and singing with talented cousins who took different paths. Rock and roller Jerry Lee Lewis and country singer Mickey Gilley. Now, obviously, the most interesting characterization of Swaggart was Alec Baldwin in the biopic with Dennis Quaid, Great Balls of Fire, where basically Jerry Lee gave him his car for the ministry. Now, in his hometown of Faraday, Louisiana, Swaggart said he first heard a call of God at age 8. The voice gave him goosebumps and made his hair tingle, he said. Everything seemed different after that day in front of the Arcade Theater. He said in an 1985 interview with the Jacksonville Journal-Courier in Illinois, "I felt better inside, almost like taking a bath." He preached. He worked part-time in oil fields until he was 23. He then moved entirely into his ministry, preaching, playing piano, and singing gospel songs with the barrelhouse favor of Cousin Lewis at Assemblies of God revivals and camp meetings. Now, Swaggart eventually started a radio show, a magazine, then moved into TV with outspoken views. He called Roman Catholicism satanic and a false religion. It's not the Christian way, and claimed that Jews suffered for thousands of years because of their rejection of Christ. Now, if you don't like what I say, talk to my boss. He once shouted as he strode in front of his congregation at his family worship center in Baton Rouge, where his sermons moved listeners to speak in tongues and stand up and possessed by the Holy Spirit. Swaggart's messages stirred thousands of congregants and millions of TV viewers, including he would pay for airtime in independent stations across the States and Canada, making him a household name by the late 80s. Contributors billed Jimmy Swaggart Ministries in a business that made an estimated $142 million in '86. His Baton Rouge complex includes a worship center and broadcasting and recording facilities. Now, Swaggart's downfall came in the late 80s as other prominent preachers faced similar scandals. Swaggart said publicly that his earnings were hurt in '87 by the sex scandal surrounding rival televangelist Jim Bakker and a former church secretary at Baker's PTL ministry organization. The following year, Swaggart was photographed in a hotel with Deborah Murphy, an admitted prostitute who told reporters that the two did not have sex, but that the preacher had paid her to pose nude. She later repeated the claim and posed nude for Penthouse. Now, surveillance photos that crippled Swaggart's career apparently stemmed from his rivalry with preacher Marvin Gorman, whom Swaggart had accused of sexual misdeeds. Gorman hired a photographer who captured Swaggart and Murphy on film. Swaggart later paid Gorman $1.8 million to settle a lawsuit over the sexual allegations against Gorman. Now, more trouble came in '91 when police in California detained Swaggart with another prostitute. The evangelist was charged with driving on the wrong side of the road and driving an unregistered Jaguar. His companion, Rosemary Garcia, said Swaggart became nervous when he saw the police car and weaved when he tried to stuff porn magazines under a car seat. Swaggart was later mocked by the late TV comic Phil Hartman on Church Chat, who impersonated him on NBC's Saturday Night Live. Now, the Evangelist largely stayed out of the news in later years, but remained a pulpit at Jimmy Swaggart Ministries, joined by son Donnie, a fellow preacher. His radio station broadcast church services and gospel music to 21 states, and Swaggart's ministry boasted a worldwide audience on the internet. The preacher caused another brief stir in 2004 with remarks about being looked at amorously by a gay man. And am I going to be blunt and plain? If one ever looks at me like that, I'm going to kill him and tell God he died, Swaggart said, to laughter from her congregation. He later apologized. Now, Swaggart made few public appearances outside his church, save for singing Amazing Grace at the 2005 funeral of Louisiana Secretary of State Fox McCutcheon, a prominent name in state politics for decades. In 2022, he shared memories at the memorial service for Lewis, his cousin and rock and roll pioneer. The pair had released The Boys of Faraday, a gospel album, earlier that year. So, Jerry Lee Lewis did not pretend he was a two-face. Mickey Gilley did not pretend he was a two-face. But Jimmy Swaggart, ladies and gentlemen, the negativity, Oral Roberts and Rex Humbard, and, the idea about Jimmy Swaggart, ladies and gentlemen, there was a lot of talent there. There was a lot of love of the Lord, but he was misguided. Now, during his crusades, and he was spreading his shit all over the world, including Argentina, Canada, us, Chile, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Jamaica, Liberia, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Russia, and South Africa. Now, he also wrote about 50 Christian books offered through his ministry. He did sell over 50 million records worldwide as a gospel artist, and he also was nominated for a Grammy. Now, again, years active, 1955 to 2025. So technically 70 years. Now, the Faraday, Louisiana, very beautiful community. I don't blame the community for doing this, but if you're following God, you can't be a two-face, and that's what he did. So he took advantage of people with his personality, with his, and he was a charismatic guy. But it's his father again, Willie Leon, was a Pentecostal preacher, and Minnie Bell were a big influence on his early years. But ladies and gentlemen, all I can say, when he was busted, I wasn't surprised. But the fact is, like when I first started as a journalist, this is where reality TV came in. So Inside Edition, Current Affair, Entertainment Tonight. My God, when Jimmy Swaggart was busted, that ruined the televangelism on the independent side. It's still prominent in the southern. So Betty Davis once said, "You shouldn't talk bad about the dead." Joan Crawford is dead. Good. Jimmy Swaggart, one of the biggest two-faces of all time. Even McLean would do something or parody this. So Jimmy Swaggart, for the people that follow this guy, you have my condolences because you're in a cult. Jimmy Swaggart was a cultist. There's no other way to say it. So if you like what you're doing with our, in this case, remote control TV-related podcast, let us know with a like, comment, subscribe, or share.